Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Downtown Eastside Heart of the City Festival. Welcome to this special showing of Incarcerated, Truth and Shadows by the Illicit Project. And welcome to the homeland of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. My name is Terry Hunter, and I'm the Executive Director of Vancouver Moving Theatre and the artistic producer of the Downtown Eastside Heart of the City Festival. I also carry the name Nangulga, which in Haida means industrious one. My wife and I had the honor to be adopted into the Sklinglanis clan of the Haida Nation last summer. And it's with those two names and those two recognitions that it's my honor to acknowledge that we are on the unceded homeland of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and that we're very, very grateful to be living on their territories and to doing this work on those territories and to weaving our cultural practice with the cultural practice that's been on this land for thousands of years. Thank you, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And also thank you for being the caretakers of this land. We learn from you and we follow you in these matters. And it's my real distinct pleasure to also welcome to the screen to start off this evening with Mr. David Mendez and his team. Known at David's work a number of years now, back with Dirk and Kelty McCarricher and the work, and we've been following it, we being the Heart of the City Festival, with great interest and great support. This is really incredible grassroots, community-led knowledge sharing and bringing forward the knowledge and the solutions coming from the community. And David, thank you so much for the amazing work that you and your team do. We're very honored to be able to partner with you on this production, or presenting this production, I should say. Welcome, and set up the play for us, set up the what we're about to see.
Thanks, Terry. Those are very kind words. I appreciate it. So this show is a collaboration between Illicit Projects that was started out with Megaphone Magazine Speakers Bureau, as well as the UBC's Transformative Justice and Health Cluster, led by Kelsey Timler and Krista Butler. So it was brought forward through Nick Fryer, who is one of our team, and he works with them as well. So the original process began with an eight-week story writing process for the storytellers, and then I was asked to come in with our team to do the audio and visual, and so we worked together for a while, and Renai Morso was part of that as well, as exploring the stories, I suppose, and we just did our best to sort of represent the storytellers and their stories of their carceral experience in Canada. And so, you know, our job was pretty easy in this one. Really, everything goes out towards the storytellers. And again, thanks to Nick Cryer for putting it together. And I'd say my hopes of what the audience gets out of it is that they can understand that, you know, for reconciliation between whether it's drug users or victims of the drug war or Indigenous issues, that we all need to speak to each other about this without any fear of doing so, and open up a dialogue. So I'm hoping this show can sort of help create that, and that's about it.
Great. And before we start the video, I forgot to mention that there is a post-show Q&A. For those that are watching on the festival website, above the festival page, you'll see a button that says something to the effect of join the post-show discussion. So after the video is over, click on that button and you'll go into a Zoom room. You may need to wait a few minutes while we shut down this side of the equation, and we can leave this and get over to that room. Our technical control room also said that Zoom link to the post-show discussion will also be put in the chat function on the side. So there's two ways that you can get into it. David, just so our audience knows, how long is the video?
It's about 42-minute running time.
Okay. So any further words, David? You ready to roll the tape?
I'm ready to roll.
Okay, rock and roll, Kimmett.
It was a blustery November day in 2005, one that would change my life. I've been an on-again, off-again addict for much of my life. Along with that came bad choices. Mind you, some by circumstance. I'm from a broken family of 8 girls and 1 boy, a result of my mother's 2 failed marriages. At the age of 10 or so, I became a ward of the courts. Later in life, I would learn that I was also a product of intergenerational trauma due to residential school. But that's a whole new ball of wax I won't get into. I became a mother at 14 years of age while in a foster home. My child's father lived in the same home. He was shot and killed in front of me. I was 6 months pregnant at this time. My child would be adopted out to a family member. We keep in touch to this day. Then I was married for the first time shortly after my 16th birthday. Social services signed for it, allowing this to happen. I was so young, but grew up so fast. If the social services weren't so keen to take me away from my family, things may have turned out differently in my life, and not the way they were paved out going into my adulthood. I honestly feel the social services failed me big time. The system is terribly flawed to this day, and now is much like the new residential school. Unforeseen alcohol poisoning would take my first husband away from me, leaving my 2.5-year-old son, an 11-month-old daughter fatherless, and me a widow at 21 years old. I was devastated. I flew into further alcoholism. I couldn't handle the grief again. Thankfully, my in-laws kept my 2 children until I was ready to face the reality of the loss of my husband. Approximately 1.5 years had passed. During this time, I had constant contact with my children. In 1978, I went into another relationship that would last 6 to 7 years. This too was riddled with addiction and abuse by both of us, to one another at first. Then one day it involved my youngest child, a product of this relationship, so I chose to leave. Thank God my mother was still with us, and we decided it best if she cared for my now 3 children until I could again overcome separation. Eventually I got my children back and then carried on normally for many years on my own until my second marriage. My children were much older then, and this relationship lasted maybe 7 years. Thankfully, I never had any more children. We went our separate ways, and then he too passed away from a drug overdose. Looking back, it seems like I always looked for the same kind of relationships that were normal to me. Much of this thinking is credited to residential school. The harms that followed my people for 7 generations continue up to this day. I had an old male friend from many years ago that I'd keep seeing, and our relationship grew beyond friendship on the daily. That was fabulous at first. We did recognize that we both had trust and jealousy issues, but we still pushed forward and eventually moved in together. This would last a few years with many splits and physical fights, until finally we decided I would move out. We still continued to see one another even after I moved. He'd call me over, and of course, I'd get lured with drugs and alcohol and go back. Our relationship became beyond toxic. In November 2005, my sister called me. She was coming to the city from Kelowna and wanted to see us. But she didn't know we were separated. I told her, and she decided to call my ex-partner to go to his place to have a few drinks. He said yes, so we went to the beer and wine store, then on to his place. It was about 10:30 to 11 a.m. We were drinking lots and making runs for crack cocaine throughout the day and into the evening. My ex-partner and I were fine at first, pretty civil to one another, amazingly. But as the day became night and we'd consumed so much liquor and drugs, we started to argue more. It became more intense, and it was getting physical. My sister passed out on the couch cold. She didn't even flinch while we were fighting. He pinned me down on the armchair. There was a coffee table close to this, so I reached for any object to hit him with. Keep in mind you have no time to think if you're put in a fight-back position, only time to react. Have you ever had to defend yourself? As it turned out, it was the small paring knife he'd used earlier in the day to fix my sister's watch strap. I struck him once, then almost immediately realized what I'd just done. So I screamed at him to stay still, and I ran to our neighbor's place to get help. I returned to the apartment, and shortly after, the police barreled in with their shotguns pointed at me. They got me cuffed and outside in the paddy wagon, where I was kept for what seemed like hours. I was freezing in the winter weather, snow-covered grounds, no jacket while wearing torn clothes. I was taken to lockup, stripped one item at a time, and put in a white paper jumpsuit. Mugshots were taken, and I was fingerprinted. Then I was read charges again. This time it was for aggravated assault, which was upgraded to second-degree murder 3 days later, after my ex-partner succumbed to the injury and other complications. I was sent to pretrial, then to court, and to a place to reside that was approved by my probation officer while out on bail. The bail came with very strict conditions, including having to have an escort everywhere I went outside the home. The escorts also had to be approved by the PO. I'd never been in trouble with the law, even though I frequented the downtown east side and lived there, other than a minor theft, which is anything under $5,000, many years ago. I was never a menace to society. While I was adjusting to being out on bail, my youngest daughter was struggling with addiction after she'd made plans to attend Round Lake, a treatment center up north, and was en route there. She had an hour layover in Vancouver. She called me saying, "Mom, I'm not sure I'm gonna make it." She knew her addiction was too strong. As it turned out, I got that dreaded call from VPT that she had been found in SRO by herself, overdosed. My world came crashing down hard. I had to go tell my 2 granddaughters and plan her services with very limited movement. Thankfully, my family and church members assisted me. This took place 4 months after the offense. I was left in a state of absolute devastation and disbelief. I was ordered to get counseling around the 2 recent deaths while out on bail, but because of lack of confidentiality, I stopped and leaned on my church family. The first day of trial arrived. My defense was weak. I really had no one in my corner. I was on partial welfare and a widow's pension, so could not afford a good lawyer for myself. And so I was appointed a legal aid lawyer, most that do bare minimum work on anyone's defense. Mine was a case of self-defense, but me, being Native and the deceased Caucasian, it was that much harder for the jury to swallow, and I got sentenced to 10 years to life. I was sent to Fraser Valley Institution. I was scared shitless. I was to do 2 years in maximum, which holds 5 women per unit. Due to overcrowding, I was moved 20 times in 26 months. This caused me anxiety at times. I lashed out. That would set me back in my growth. In prison, you are directed when to do most everything, and if you don't comply, the punishment is usually far worse than warranted. But that's prison, where you're never right. You lose your freedom along with your voice. So I appealed my sentence and got a second trial ordered. But the process was very slow, like in years. While I was trying to adjust in prison, a guard saw I was having a hard time. She took me aside and talked to me about the length of time I would be serving in reality, and suggested I start working on myself and to start to put better tools in my belt, so to speak, to prepare for my upcoming trial, and to not dwell on any tomorrows, so as to give me a hope for a future. Needless to say, she was the one positive I had in my corner. Again, I requested bail while waiting for trial, and I got it. At least the conditions were not as severe as the first time when I was released again. We went to court again, onto my second lawyer, and the judge and jury were selected to try me. The judge called my lawyer and Crown Counsel into his chambers. After a week of deliberations, he told them if it were up to him, he'd lower the charge. But it was not his call. It was up to the jury.
Lower the charges.
Since the jury was made up of middle-class people who have no clue as to how our parties or lifestyles are, they ended up sentencing me to 10 years to life again. I was horrified and beyond devastated, so much so that I ended up in the hospital emergency with a severe case of anxiety. I couldn't breathe. So far, I'd done 3+ years in Fraser Valley Institution and was returning again, except the officials had some confusion as to where to house me. I'd completed my 2 years in max. But if you lose your appeal and are resentenced, you are supposed to start from day one again. Thankfully, a prison lawyer fought my case, and I was released from max into a medium security setting. I was no longer afraid, but was more determined than ever to get this right. So on to another lawyer. We appealed it and won. I began awaiting a third trial. So from 2005 to 2013, almost 8.5 years passed. Pretty much a life sentence served. The judge, alone in the third trial, heard me and found the truth. Finally, she lowered my charge to manslaughter with time served. I was not on this journey alone. Family and friends walked beside me through this all, so in a sense they did time with me. The hardest part was being denied visits or having to hurry up and wait. Being of Indigenous descent, I chose to follow the Red Road upon release. After many conversations with my grandchildren, who encouraged me to change my ways of past choices, I had been given a second chance to make this too right. So my greatest gift of all throughout the heartaches in prison was being able to make a choice of not using alcohol or drugs again. After all the deaths, separations, the adoption of my child, I still have compassion. This is all behind me now, and I'm focused on a brighter future. I've come full circle from that blustery November day in 2005 to now. I'm not a file, I'm a person with a gentle voice, but I can make it roar.
Justice is blind. It sees no color, race, or sexual orientation. Our justice system is one of the best in the world, but it still needs work. Look how I got hung out to dry. First, who am I? I'm a hider, though I've never been home. I do hope to go one day before I die. I hear it's beautiful. I was born in a northern town so small, if you look to the left, you would see that end of town. And look to the right, you've seen the other end of town. I've had a beautiful life, a ridiculous one, and a difficult one. Now, back to our justice system. When I was arrested, I was not employed and could not afford a lawyer, so the court appointed me one. Let's call him MJ. Now MJ was a man who had dreams only he could see. He did not look much like a lawyer, but his resume spoke well for him, winning about 60% of his cases. That's a good chance for me. My confidence in him started to grow as soon as I entered the visitor's cubicle of pretrial detention center. This is where you end up before your court date. Trapped, but maybe not for too long. He stepped into the cubicle and put his briefcase on the table. Opening it, he started putting out stacks of papers, a pen, and a big yellow-paged legal pad. He sat and got as comfortable as the chair would allow. Then he spoke. Hi, my name is MJ. The court has appointed me as your lawyer. Start right from the beginning. Don't miss a thing. Remember, this is your life. The lump in my throat would not go up or down. I tried taking a deep breath. I bowed my head and looked at my hands and folded in my lap. It reminded me of sitting outside the principal's office back in school. The room started to spin in circles. My stomach tightened and I thought I was going to puke, but instead I spoke. I want to plead guilty. MJ did not act surprised to hear this. Instead, he put his pen down and looked me straight in the eye and asked, why? Just a simple little word. Through tears and choking, my nose running, somehow I finished my story, what had happened between my wife and I. I watched MJ's body language. He had not moved a muscle. When I finished, it was MJ's turn to speak. He was ready. He put down his pen and looked me straight in the eye. That's all you want, then that's what we'll do. We'll walk into the courtroom with a guilty plea, throw ourselves on the mercy of the court. He pauses for a moment long enough for me to notice. When he spoke again, his voice was serious. Here are the problems with pleading guilty. Number one problem is you don't belong here. You're an outsider. This is a small town. This never happens around these parts. And they're going to give you the max. They're not going to show you any mercy. Number two is you're unemployed and homeless. Your record is almost all violent, plus you have a low grade in schooling. Now, number three is very important. If you're found guilty and you're a native, your sentence will be harsh. They do not take it easy on natives around here. Tears had filled my eyes as he was speaking, and the lump came back. I managed to ask, "Are you saying you can get me off?" MJ reached out and put his hands on my shoulders. He smiled reassuringly at me. "Yes," he replied. "Yes, I can, but you'll have to get that guilty plea out of your head." He goes on telling me how it's important that I cease looking for my wife immediately. It doesn't look good in the courtroom. It may look like you're stalking her, and that's another charge we do not need. So, he continued, stop looking for her. He pauses a half a minute so I could internalize what he had just told me. Listen, when you get out of here, you will have all the time in the world to find your wife and make amends with her. Understand right now she's your enemy. You do not want to find her right now. She's angry and hurt. He took a moment to look at the police report. There was a lot of hms and ha's. Then it was head shaking and mumbling. I sat in my chair trying to be still while MJ read the report. I was nervous. Sweat was running through my shirt, leaving trails all down my back. He finally looked up. My God, how long did you live there? A month? How did you manage 63 empty cases of beer, 2 26ers, and a 40-pounder found behind your trailer? We drank them. MJ looked upset for a moment. Then it was gone. He got up and stood straight. Now is not the time to go for bail. Hear me out, okay? First, you and your wife consumed a lot of alcohol in a short time. We'll go for a 30-day psychological assessment to see if you're fit to stand trial. They won't give us bail, given all the alcohol surrounding the incident, so we may as well do it. That gets us out of sight, and out of sight, out of mind. So that was the plan. 30 days to let things cool down a bit. Then maybe go for bail. It was just to see if you were fit to stand trial. Nothing else. If they ask about the trial, tell them you're not at liberty to speak about that. MJ filled me in on the do's and don'ts of the forensic center. Then the rules seemed fair to me. No fighting, things like that. Then I was on my way to the nut house for a 30-day vacation. At least that's what I thought. As soon as I got there, things started to happen. As soon as you get to the nut house, you have to have a bath. You have a bath in front of a 6-foot-tall white male nurse. It's dehumanizing, embarrassing. I remember it like it was yesterday. Well, anyways, as I was heading up the stairs for my bath, I spotted a middle-aged man. He had $600 suit on, his briefcase, another $200 or $300. I figured he was either a very rich nut or he was a lawyer. As we passed each other on the stairs, I stopped him and I asked which he was. Once he told me he was a lawyer, I handed him a folder filled with papers for another charge I was dealing with. Might as well deal with them both at the same time, right? Read this, I said, and I'll talk to you after my bath. I don't know what made that lawyer stay, but when I found him, he was just finishing up his reading. He was shaking his head. These charges are really messed up, he said as he stuck his hand out for a shake. Let's call him Peter Ryan. Hi, I'm Peter Ryan, and they cannot be serious. There's no case here. He doesn't pick you out of a photo lineup until the 5th time. Then he quickly writes a note to the officer in charge, stating he picked the wrong guy that time. I told him I wanted to deal with both charges, and Peter Ryan laughed. Where do I fit in your plan? He sounded amused and intrigued, so I went on. You enter stage left. I was joking, of course. I'll call the cops as soon as you leave. I'll tell them that I'm here and ready to deal with these charges. They'll be here to execute the warrant by 6:30, and I'll be in the holding cells by 7, and that's where you meet up. Bring all the papers to make you my lawyer. That was a plan, but things did not go like clockwork. The sheriff showed up at 5:30. Luckily, they arrived without a warrant or a day pass. They need both of them to take me out. Sadly, it only takes a few minutes to get both the warrant and day pass. I wasn't ready to go. I needed to wait for Peter Ryan. Then until 6:30, I hid under one of the beds. The sheriff was some pissed when he finally found me. I didn't get a chance to meet up with Peter Ryan, and he didn't end up helping me out in this case. He kept in touch, and he ended up giving me some bad legal counsel, but that's a whole other story for another time. Back in the psych hospital, I was called to meet my psychiatrist. I marched right into the office just to show her I was fit to stand trial. I did so in the first 15 minutes. She smiles. Now let us talk about those nasty charges. That's as far as I went with her. I politely told her no, I would not talk about my charges to her. 2 more times she tried. Finally, I explained to her that no matter how many times she asked, I wouldn't talk about my case with her. That's what MJ had told me to do, and I trusted him. She left me alone after that, and I did the rest of my 30 days quite peacefully, with the exception of a few altercations, one set up by the nurses and one for my conscience. Or maybe it was a way to avoid thinking about my wife and my case. I was frustrated. 30 days felt so much longer, but at least I was a big shot in the nut house. Then it was back to reality, and I was back in pretrial detention. At the time I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. I had no control, was powerless, alone, and fighting for my life. In pretrial, I met up with an associate I met in remand. He had exact same charges. Let's call him JT. Now JT was a giant, much bigger and much more violent. He thought he was the worst badass in the joint. If we ever got into it, I would lay my bets on me, though. But today he is smiling. He thought he was going to get 5 years. No, not so. He got 2 years less a day, out in 18 months with good time. JT's ass shone with glory. I felt relieved. I could see no difference between him and I. So I was looking at a fair sentence, similar to what JT got. I felt this was fair, given how similar our charges were again. Again, I was woken up to reality. I was denied bail, and my worst nightmare happened. The psychiatrist had overstepped her bounds and written a report, her own opinions on why I refused to talk. It was her opinion that nobody was safe. I was a dangerous person who was not willing to change. It hurt when Crown asked for it to be accepted into evidence, even though the psychiatrist could not be found to be cross-examined. To this day, I say the report shouldn't have been allowed. MJ let it pass with only one objection. He did it in a small voice, telling the judge it was the only to see if I was fit to stand trial. I don't think the judge even heard him. I was upset at the way he was handling the case. The amount of alcohol I had drank was being used against me, adding stigma. I figured he might have sold me out. I knew he sold me out in his closing statement. All MJ said was, "Your Honor, please remember my friend has had a hard upbringing." I waited 1.5 years for court. All of it was for nothing. I was sold out by my lawyer, a man that later used this case to further his career. I should have pled guilty. I should have followed my gut. There was nothing. My heart was broken. I stood alone. The judge only took a few hours to decide my fate. I knew I was in trouble when all I saw in the judge's pale white hand was the psych report. In his decision, he kept referring to the report, saying in closing that I had no chance of rehabilitation. I was sentenced to 10 years in prison. My knees buckled and the sheriff helped me to stand. That sheriff had sat with me since the beginning of the trial. He asked me if I was going to appeal, that it was a ridiculous sentence. I said nothing. I sat in the courtroom until it was cleared, and I cried. When I got back to the detention center, I went to the bath to wash my face. As I rinsed the soap off, I looked in the mirror. For the first time in my life, I realized my skin was red.
The beginning, part 1. I'm not going to talk about this part. I don't remember much anyway, except the nightmares. Vivid, larger than life. Insects with big, black, wrinkled bodies. Then the insomnia, panic attacks, feeling afraid most of the time. Maybe you grew up in the same period as I did, when nobody talked about mental health. Especially not for children. She's very shy, my parents would explain in quiet, confused voices. I wrapped myself up in silence and tried to make myself invisible. Bully, victim, trauma. These words were not spoken in my language. She's 6 years old and still believes in monsters, they said. The Beginning, Part 2. The first time I got arrested, the police came to my home, but they were not looking for me. It was a big show. A lot of officers for someone like me who had never even received a parking ticket before. They took me away in handcuffs, without my shoes and without my dignity. She was such a good girl. It's always the quiet ones you have to watch out for. Whose words were those? Why are they talking about me? I was in love with a boy who had followed me here from Toronto, and he supported my drug use and his by supplying customers with a variety of substances. We lived together and he did most of his business while I was at work or sleeping. Just give us a statement and we can let you out of here. We just want to help you. So very ironic that they expected the quiet girl to talk. I found out later that they had been watching our place from an empty apartment across the hallway, so they knew exactly when my lover had left. My silence was a slap in the face to them, I think, but I really had no choice, and they underestimated how comfortable I could make myself in the uncomfortableness of quiet. A few days later, I was released barefoot into the busyness of downtown Vancouver without my cell phone and my choices restricted. Drug addict. Criminal. I know the voices aren't real, but I hear them all around me. How did these words get inside my head? Inside I am free, not much thicker than air. I lose my clothing and my name. Inside, we are all the same. I sleep and I eat, when they tell me to. Usually so quiet I could disappear, passing my time for half a year. The handcuffs come off, yet something remains. I cannot choose a metaphor to describe the revolving door. It's cold out here. I've lost most of my friends. My home, my life is on the street. I really just want something hot to eat. Outside the work wears me down. The drugs tell me what to do. I carry my burden like a heavy load, gracefully trying not to explode. What are you looking for when you bring me into the office-like room? You have already found what you needed to find. My lifeline, my crutch. Even residue is enough to warrant charges. I am once again trapped in an archaic social dance where the characters change, but the roles remain the same. I don't play my part well. I have no choice but to listen to your questions, your promises, your threats. I will not break my silence. Frustrated, you end the dance. Until next time, of course. I may not have been born on the streets, but I am well aware that dancing with you is not in my best interests. Are you looking for my power when you comment about my body and joke about my black eye? When I refuse to allow access for you to search my car, and yet I watch, handcuffed and helpless from the sidelines, when you bulldoze your way in anyway? Literally throwing my dirty laundry all over the side of Broadway, right at dawn. Early morning commuters stare. You have to let me go after that. You don't find what you are looking for. I am left alone to collect my scattered belongings. Embarrassed, but I am not broken. Are you looking for your power, using whatever means necessary? The worst is when you call my mother. I don't know how you know her phone number. I am a 30-year-old woman who has not lived with my parents for at least a decade. I have to admit, hearing her voice almost made me crumble. It was like an arrow pierced through my heart, and suddenly a waterfall threatened to burst from the cracks in my stone. But I am stubborn and silent and stay seated. I will not dance. Handcuffs go on, taken back once more. This is my revolving door. I had one visitor. She was practically a stranger. I mean, I had seen her once a week for a while when she and some friends came in to talk about God. I didn't really believe in what they were talking about, but I enjoyed the coffee and the change of scenery, so I kept listening. I remember feeling so surprised when my name was called for visitation. Disbelief. I had been fending for myself for such a long time. I don't even remember her name. Her face radiated so much kindness that it still brings tears to my eyes. I talked. She brought me a book and her phone number. We talked. So many people, myself included, had been trying to figure out what was wrong with me for such a long time. She needs to stand up for herself. She should start playing sports. She has to stop seeing that guy. I've heard it all. Turns out, all I needed was some kindness. Now, I'm not going to tell you it was easy to change. When you're given labels and restrictions and stigma, it takes a very strong person to overcome these and not become who you are told to be. Every so often their voices come back, whispering their accusations, and I feel small. The little girl who still believes in monsters comes back, but this time, instead of pushing her aside, I invite her in. I hold her and I cry as I tell her it wasn't her fault. "We are okay now," I whisper. Now I am a mother. I have 2 little boys and I spend hours listening to their words and talking about every important detail of their days. With my kiddos, I'm a firm believer in natural consequences, connection seeking rather than attention seeking, and above all, kindness. I have a job that I'm very good at. I work with the challenging students, the ones who can't communicate, who bite, who run, who bang their heads on the linoleum floor because they are so frustrated that they are not being heard, the ones who need so much more love. She told me to talk, to tell my story. I have flashbacks sometimes where I see the 6-year-old me crying as she is crawling up a grassy hill, and the last time I saw her, she was making movements with her mouth, but no words were coming out. And I realized it was my voice that needs to be heard.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm sure you're as moved as I was by that amazing production, those 3 videos, the story sharing, and the quality of the shadow work. My congratulations to the Illicit team. David, do you want to come back on for a sec and just say hi? And thank you so much. Your mic's off, Dave.
Here I am.
Thank you so much. Really powerful work. The theme of this festival this year is stories we need to hear. And boy, are these ever stories we need to hear. And I'm so glad that we got to hear them. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It was a pleasure doing it, and thanks to everybody involved, especially the storytellers. Yeah.
Mhm. We're not going to chat here long. We do have a post-show chat room. So for those of you who are watching it on the festival website, you look above the screen and you'll see a button called something to the effect of post-show Zoom meetup, something to that effect. Or if you're on the YouTube platform, the link has been placed in the chat bar on the side. So we'll see you there. Do know it takes us a couple of minutes to make the transition. So when you go into the room, or when you go in, you'll see a notice saying wait a few minutes before we let you in. So, but it'll take us 1 or 2 minutes. Is that right, Kimmit? 1 to 2 minutes? I'm getting a thumbs up from the control room. So 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you very much to those who are not joining us, and to those who are joining us in the post-show Q&A. We look forward to seeing you there in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Terry.